Childhood, for a lot of people, began the normality of dysfunction. And then not only that, but because it was a comfortable and familiar dynamic to childhood, they then attracted it as they grew into adolescence and adulthood. Not only that, all of these people in a person's life, as they were comfortable and familiar to that dynamic of dysfunction, became reinforcements for them to further solidify and calcify this belief and this idea that dysfunction is somehow not only normal, but acceptable, tolerable, all these things, right? When I talk about dysfunction, I'm talking about exceedingly fucked up dynamics in family systems where things like enmeshment take place, where a person does not get to learn about their own sense of autonomy and end up being in exceedingly unhealthy dynamics in relationships as they grow into adulthood. People had their boundaries violated in childhood because they weren't raised in healthy family systems, right? And so, therefore, they learn to continue attracting those dynamics later on into adulthood. And all of those individual relationships that they held into adulthood became reinforcements that further led them to believe that the same thing over and over again, which is dysfunction is normal, dysfunction is acceptable, dysfunction is tolerable. It's not. It's not good or bad or right or wrong, it's just not healthy. The fascinating thing about any individual is that what is required for a healthy individual to evolve is, from a very early age, the exact opposite of dysfunction, right? It is healthy boundaries, it is individuation, it is differentiation, right? But oftentimes, a lot of people end up getting sucked into dysfunctional dynamics, and that's because it's comfortable and familiar to childhood. Let me just make it very clear right now that it is not in any way, shape, or form normal, no matter who it is that you're being triangulated with, no matter who it is that's being the reinforcement of that dysfunction, no matter what label, what status, what, initials they hold, doctor, whoever it is, right? People that learned dysfunction and didn't do anything to change it and see it as acceptable, see it as normal, see it as the baseline, are likely to be the ones that continue to reinforce that in their own life, in other people's lives. And the fascinating thing about this, too, is you'll find this happening all the time, right? Somebody does something in somebody's life and it is dysfunctional, right? And then they might triangulate somebody else into the scenario to get the person to believe that it's just the way that things are, right? And it's fascinating because it's complete fucking bullshit. And it's not healthy. And I'm going to call it for what I believe it is, which is unacceptable, right? These are standards for healthy living. When I say healthy, I'm referring specifically to mental and emotional health, right? And mental and emotional health impact physical health, right? But we're not going to get into that so deeply in this video. This is just really looking at the reality that so many people have learned to live dysfunction because they've believed that it's normal, because they were raised that way, and they learned to continue to attract that through other reinforcements later on as they have grown up. Boundary violations, which is dysfunctional, is not normal. It's exceedingly unhealthy, especially consistently, and you basically learn that you don't get to have this own safe bubble of boundaries for yourself, right? You learn that you are people's emotional punching bags to, emotionally abuse, right? And it's not healthy, right? Dysfunction is being a narcissistic extension for somebody, whether being their emotional punching bag or the person that they go to rely on for literally everything, which as an adult they should be relying on for themselves. That's just the reality of it, right? Dysfunction is dysfunction. You know, there is no other way of looking at it. It will never be any other way. It is unhealthy. It is unacceptable, and it leads to exceedingly unhealthy and even dangerous dynamics between people. When you believe outside of healthy standards that anything is going to be sustainable, that anything's going to be healthy, that anything's going to be normal at some point, it's not. It's just not the way that it works. And understanding that for what it is and actually seeing that things don't change unless you see things for what they are. not what people want you to see them for, what they actually are. One of the most powerful aspects of healing is awareness. And when I say awareness, I'm referring specifically to that whole game of Neo in the Matrix, seeing everything as information, seeing everything as what it is, rather than what it is that people want you to see it for. People will try to get you to see things for other than what they actually are, because, it's a distraction, right? You might have an entire family system that is being utilized as a reinforcement to further continue dysfunction. It does not mean that it's normal. It does not mean that it's acceptable. It does not mean that it should be tolerated, right? There are unhealthy people out there that come together to create a reinforcement in somebody's life that this is just the way that things are. There's nothing else out there, right? There's nothing better for people out there, right? Gaslighting people into believing that there's just simply nothing else, that you are isolated and secluded to this small group, so you might as well learn to deal with it. You might as well learn to take it, right? You ever heard that saying, take the punches, right? People that lack healthy boundaries are going to abuse you in one way or another. And it's really important to understand that unless you see it for what it is, you will continue to go down the same rabbit hole of unhealthy, toxic, and dysfunctional reinforcements that bring you back to the same dynamic over and over again. That's the reality of it. That's how this works. Dysfunction, no matter how much it has seemingly been normalized, will never be normal. Boundary violations from a family system that is enmeshed, that doesn't understand healthy boundaries, that never took the time to create healthy individuation and differentiation individually within its system, right? That is dysfunctional. Enmeshment is dysfunctional. Enmeshment leads to a lack of autonomy. Enmeshment leads to a lack of, freedom of choice, right? People that are enmeshed, they oftentimes lack the capacity to see their own individual choice and what it is that they can actually do for themselves, because they're sucked into an exceedingly unhealthy family dynamic that has them in this glob rather than seeing themselves as an autonomous individual, right? It's wild how a person's perception of themselves and people develop when they are raised in family systems that are dysfunctional and that lack healthy boundaries. You won't get to experience your own sense of autonomy if you are raised in a system of enmeshment. That is, unless you wake up and understand what it is that's been happening. And that's the really important work to be done here, because that is the ticket out of dysfunction. Dysfunction is dysfunction. There are no, I'll use a word that I think might be helpful for people. It's kind of weird to use this word, but I'll use it anyway. Well, two words. There are no alternative facts here. There are no exceptions. There's nothing else here, right? Dysfunction is dysfunction. That's just the way that it is, right? It will never be that dysfunction is acceptable. It will never be that, oh, maybe in 100 years it will be. No, dysfunction is dysfunction. Boundary violations are boundary violations. An individual that is not individuated and not differentiated is an individual that is not differentiated and individuated. It means that they lack healthy emotional maturity. It means that they're going to have an exceedingly difficult time in relationships. It means that they're likely to indulge in dynamics of dysfunction. And the only way that that would ever change is if they were to become aware of it. And it's very important to understand that. Because, again, dysfunction is dysfunction. It's not anything other than dysfunction. And it will never be anything other than unhealthy. All right? Individual autonomy is a very interesting thing. The capacity for any person to wake up from their childhood slumber of trauma, right, and understand that they have every right to healthy boundaries, they have every right to individuation and differentiation, is the ticket out of what I would consider hell psychologically. You might not even know that you're in hell, but you're in it psychologically. Enmeshment is hell because it is a load of unnecessary pain from boundary violations that a lot of people are totally unaware of. Actually, to end this off real quick, I get a bunch of comments. Sorry for any background noise, by the way. I'll end this off right now. I get a bunch of comments from people on my YouTube videos talking about how they didn't know what they didn't know, and they're seeing it more clearly now.